But, I think considering they did not have a pick until 74, I actually think they did a pretty decent job. Because we talked about the talent of Cedric Tillman at Tennessee. He could end up being one of the better receivers in this draft class if all goes well, especially now that he has Deshaun Watson throwing for him. You got the defensive tackle from Baylor, so we know that he's a talent. He can help out in the rotation, which is something Cleveland desperately needs. And when you are an offensive lineman and you get drafted to Cleveland and one of the best offensive line coaches in the game and Bill Callahan, and you have talent like both kids from Ohio State, especially Dawand Jones in round 4, you're going to have that much better of a shot to stick. And I really like those 2 picks as well. I mean, who doesn't like the pick at Ohio State with round 6? Because a lot of people thought that was a kid that could have gone as high as the 3rd round.
Yep. Yeah, there was a medical that popped up on him, so I think a few teams crossed him off the board. And honestly, a group, I also think what hurt Whippler, there were a lot of good centers in this draft. In a normal year, I think he gets picked a little bit higher than this, but the medical in combination with the strong center class bumped him down. But for Cleveland, if this kid pans out, he could be a starting center this year, so to get that in 6th round, which again, like we said this before, a lot of teams, that's where they get their centers, rounds 5, 6, 7, undrafted free agency. But like you said, this team, they had to add to the trenches, right? Perion Winfrey, this went a little under the radar, but he got arrested leading up to the draft. I think it was 2 or 3 weeks before, and it was causing a bodily injury to a woman. And that kind of stuff in the league, I mean, you have to think there's going to be a suspension coming at some point. And,
and they already had depth issues to begin with.
Right. And I don't think this dictated the draft at all, but it just kind of strengthened the notion that Ika pick in round 3, towards the end of round 3, kind of solidifies the fact that was a really good selection, right? And 3 of their first 4 picks were in the trenches, right? They got Tillman, and then they go D-line, O-line, D-line. So you knew, and we knew leading up to the draft, that this is where they were weakest, and this is what's been killing them late in the season. So now you have Deshaun Watson coming off of some football for the first time in a while. Offensive and defensive lines should be strengthened at least a little bit. And, I love what they did here. Dawand Jones, I believe, will be the kind of like the make or break for the draft class. When we talk about this draft class 3 years from now, it's going to be, what did this kid turn into? Because like you said, if there's one offensive line coach that I want to work with a player like this, it's Callahan. The other one would be the guy from Philadelphia. And ironically, in the Cleveland press conference, the name that came up when Dawand Jones was being discussed was the left tackle, Jordan Mailata, the rugby player that came in. Unbelievable size, speed, movement ability, unbelievably raw, though, and it took him a while, but now he's a Pro Bowl caliber left tackle. Dawand Jones, they called him a human orca, a human Goliath, right? But he's going to be a work in progress, a lump of clay that needs to be molded, and he will not see the field this year. I think he's going to be a 2-year project.
And he could end up, if it works out, he could end up maybe even their starting left tackle, because Jedrick Willis has got to get going.
Yeah. So this is I think this is a knock. They're not going to get rid of Conklin. That organization loves Conklin. So Dawand Jones, yes, he played right tackle in college, but the size and movement trace that he has, we've almost never seen it before. So if Callahan can have him do an Orlando Brown type transformation where, hey, the movement doesn't always look pretty, but once you understand, like Trent Brown almost from New England, if you know how to really use your size, you're not going to get beat. It's because you're never going to lose ground against a bull rush, and all you have to do is get to a certain point in pass protection because nobody can get around you in your wide wingspan. So that's going to be a really interesting situation to follow.
Okay, and on the other side, regarding especially pass rushing, because we talked about that besides definitely needing some depth at defensive tackle, they needed more depth at edge rush, because you can't rely on Myles Garrett to do everything all the time.
Right.
And so they add Isaiah McGuire in the 4th round, and they also signed Lonnie Phelps, who was a draftable player. So, so talk about especially McGuire. Can he make an impact right away?
He can, and partially it's the situation that's in front of him. I think he could be the second best defensive end on that team by the end of the year. He has the NFL body. He has the NFL power. And what you love the most about his pass rush repertoire, he has that hard to find, but you know it when you see it, slipperiness.
Okay.
He knows how to get by blockers. He knows how to miss their hands, right? And he's not the bendiest guy. He's not the quickest guy in the world, but he knows what he's doing, and he combines that with great size, great power, great reach. Between him and Alex Wright, their 2022 third-round pick, I got to think one of those guys is going to end up the starter across Garrett before the end of the season.
Okay. And what do you like about Lonnie Felt's chances?
Special teams. He's widely considered the best special teamer in the draft.
Wow.
If you watch it,
that's tough
not many
for
people
a defensive lineman.
Yeah, not many, and it's a mentality, right? And he's got some speed. He ran a 4.6. I mean, he's got some athletic ability. As a D end, I don't know if I see him as an every down player, but I think he could be a situational guy as a pass rusher. But his route to making this team will be on special teams. He's one of the few guys that you'll just pop the tape on and you'll want to watch him run down the field on kickoff and punt and bang some heads. It's a fun kid to watch, A lot of energy. But he was a productive player between Miami of Ohio and Kansas and he turned some heads at the Senior Bowl. So I think he's got a good shot at making this roster.
Also, some other players, let's see, Cameron Mitchell, the corner, went in round 5. They were able to use or not use a draft pick on a player that was definitely draftable, and that was Ronnie Hickman, the Ohio State safety. Diabate's also had time with a couple of big-time programs, the linebacker. So anybody else, besides even Charlie Thomas, we know about him. So anybody else, or did you want to talk a little bit more about those players?
Those are the guys that really caught my attention. Jeremiah Martin's another DN, just because this team's looking for DNs that he's caught my attention. Washington had a lot of talent up front last year, and a few of them went back to school. 2 of them went back to school last year, but he's the one that came out. Older player, late transfer to Washington, really powerful kid that had the NFL look about him, just did not test athletically very well. But I like him as in a situation like this, that he could be that 5th or 6th defensive end that they keep on the roster. But yeah, the names that you gave, Diabate and Hickman, really good players that should have been drafted, but just got caught in the numbers game. And Cameron Mitchell, the second player this team has drafted at the cornerback position in 3 years. They drafted Greg Newsome round 1, 2021. And they had a lot of success with him. And Newsome was one of the guys banging the table for Mitchell, just as an underrated player that is going to be able to do some damage here.
Yeah, what you do like about it, again, is the fact that because they did not have a pick in the first 2 rounds, that they were able to land, including free agency, after the draft, they were able to land a nice number of players that should either make the roster or be valuable practice squad candidates. So and this is not a surprise. We talked also about this, that if there was any teams, Cleveland and Miami being 2 of them, that could have been okay to not have those early first or even second round draft picks, those were two of the teams, especially Cleveland, who did not make the playoffs, that you just have to look a couple of years ago at how good and how much depth that this roster had. Yes, there were a few other positions that needed help, but as we just talked about, now they've strengthened those positions. So this is still a very talented roster.
Yeah, excellent haul for these guys, considering that they didn't have a first or second round pick. If you gave me this list of names and said, this is the team, this is the group of players this team's going to walk away from the draft with, I would have told you prior to the draft that they traded up. There's a bunch of day 2 talent names, and I love the quarterback Thompson Robinson as a backup. I told you guys before the draft, he's probably like one of my favorite backup quarterbacks out of this class. I do think is going to start games in the NFL.
Wow, really?
Yes, okay. I do.
So that's one of our disagreements.
Yep.
But you know what? It all does depend on, as usual, for the quarterback position, where they get drafted, who's coaching, what kind of program are they under, and he's in a good spot because you have Deshaun Watson there, and there's not going to be a rush. But what you like is that he's going to feel like I've got the ability now to be the long-term number 2 guy to Deshaun Watson, and that is something that every team needs. So
absolutely, Tyrod Taylor type. Yep.